Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, here at my next Star Wars Rebels episode reviews. This one's going to be for episode 3 and 4, which together make up the In the Name of the Rebellion two-parter. Overall, these were both fine episodes, but I think the problem was just that I don't think there was anything all that notable about them. I appreciated them very much trying to link things together now, like Rebels now even more linked into Rogue One, even more linked into, I suppose, eventually getting to A New Hope through the Rogue One connection. I like that, but seeing Death Troopers, more Kyber Crystal stuff. Krennic kind of mentioned over the radio. I think they named the system that a lot of Rogue One takes place in as well. So that was really cool to kind of see that come out. Will they have another one? I'm assuming maybe somewhere in the second half of the season, coming towards the end, we'll maybe get a maybe even more deeper kind of Rogue One connection episode that really gets things right to where they are when that movie's about to start. Maybe timing's a little bit off, but I think we could see Saw again for sure. Maybe see how he suffers the injuries that he suffers that get him to, I suppose, where he is towards the middle point of things. But I don't know. They might do that, they might not. It all depends on timing and what exactly they do at the end of this series. So yeah, I liked seeing Saw again. He definitely made for probably the most interesting aspect of the episode, with him appearing through the droid at the Rebel base on Yavin 4, which was nice to see for sure, just to get that reference and see that moment coming together. And see him present this idea of the actual organized rebellion. I don't feel the leaders are doing enough in terms of how they're approaching to do things, and that they should do things my way and get results, rather than basically, if you follow this person and have these morals, you're just going to end up on the losing side. And would you not rather be on the winning side and be able to actually talk about these things afterwards? Which obviously was meant to set up the idea for Ezra. He more sided with Saw in these things, whereas I think most of the other rebels could see the value in what Mon Mothma was saying, and that if they go to any length possible to win the war, defeat the Empire, then it's just the Empire again in play, but under new leaderships. Whereas if the rebels actually manage to defeat the Empire while sticking to their good morals, it at least means there's this they're in this much better position when it comes to the power vacuum that is created by the Empire. So that was the main dynamic, I suppose, throughout the episode. They tried to play with some things about okay, let's go on this mission, but not blow up this thing. Instead, we'll spy on them. Then they also play later on when Sabine and Ezra are taken away by Saw. They basically more or less agree to go on a more dangerous mission, and they're forced into obviously blowing up the ship towards the end, and it just being this weird thing of Ezra and Sabine can't go anywhere without blowing something up, which I thought was a really fun callback between the episodes of just, in the first episode the Imperials, and then in the second episode it's Hera and the Ghost crew, and it's just Sabine and Ezra there looking kind of sheepishly off into the distance, just hi, we blew up your thing, kind of. There was a fun moment. They played with obviously the idea with the prisoners of Ezra immediately focused on them, Sabine immediately focused on them, but Saw didn't seem to care initially. So it was one of those ones where I thought this was better than a lot of the other episodes I've in the past criticized for doing something similar to this, where it's just another mission to help the rebellion get to a better point. They at least made this one feel like it was kind of important. In that the first one, not so much. I think the first episode was a little bit kind of dull with just it was a cool fight scene on top of the dish, but for the most part it really wasn't the best episode. The second episode was much more interesting because of the whole Kyber Crystal thing and the investigation, and getting all those connections that we're getting through Saw Gerrera. But I think the ultimate takeaway is just this was an episode that didn't feature Thrawn, who I assume is going to be our main villain for this season. And by the end of it, I'm just are you going to reference this a lot? okay, we know that they're really heavily after kyber crystals, so at some point a kyber crystal is going to get through to obviously build the Death Star, of course. But is that the only takeaway? Like, that's why I kind of believe that like Saw has to come back at some point. They have to do something else with him. The rebels, I suppose one of the results of this episode is that the rebels now have a lot of power experts on the team, which I don't know if that's meant to necessarily set up anything. And that, like, what do the rebels have that's necessarily reliant on a lot of power as such? Maybe it's like that crew that really helps to analyze the data from when they get the Death Star plans, and that allows them to come up with the plan to defeat it in the end in episode 4. But other than that, it felt like a really odd setup of like, okay, we have prisoners, let's make them power engineers because that's what the Empire would want. But now what's their use going to be to the rebels as such? Not really sure. Just because it's not like we ever really get into a situation in those movies where it's like we're really heavily into this idea of like the rebels have like a shield or something like that they're trying to keep up, and power engineers would really help. So it ended up just being a little bit like those kind of ones where we're just like, oh, here's this important person, let's go, save them. Here's designs for a starship, let's destroy them. Kyber crystal, let's do this, destroy this. Communications outpost, and it's just these missions for the sake of the rebellion that don't necessarily relate to the fact that like we're primarily focused on like a group of characters here, and we care about their development, and this is more about this lofty goal of bringing the rebellion together, which I feel the series is doing an okay job of, in that like the start of this episode, these 2 episodes with them arriving on Yavin 4 and getting the connection of like the reason we have so many scattered different types of ships is because this is a lot of different rebel cells coming together. That it isn't just a case of like there's this big rebellion, everyone's a part of it, and they just happen to have a bunch of different types of ships. No, it's like our crew primarily had, I suppose, we saw them get the Y-wings. This is where the A-wings come from, this is where the B-wings come from. They're different cells that are getting different types of ships, and that's why the fleet is so random at times. You tried to play with a little bit of an arc with Hera, and the idea of like, oh, she was shot down even though we don't exactly know how it happened at the start, and it's meant to be this thing of like she wants revenge because the Empire damaged her ships, and we got to see that Wedge was supposedly heroic in the big fight that happened. They didn't do that all that well. It was a really weird dynamic of like trying to make Hera be like, I believe Saw because I'm angry about the ships. Like, there should have been a much better setup of a scene where like maybe she lost a close friend who was a pilot. That would have made it more understanding. As it was, it's just like the way you talked about it, all your ships are just damaged. Like, you don't talk about this as if someone died here. So obviously revenge against the Empire, that's fine, but give us the reason to care as such. But I think the problem with this episode is that there's just not really all that much to talk about. Like, they destroy the Kyber crystal, which destroys that Star Destroyer, and it just continues on that trend. Saw gets away in the end, of course, but in the end our group is just in this position where it's just like, yeah, we dealt with the topic of like, should we go down a more extreme road as the rebellion, and Ezra was refocused on the fact that they're doing this for the people. In that, like, I liked scenes like Mon Mothma talking to Ezra and explaining that, like, I understand why you would want to help Lothal and want to immediately go there. I understand because my home planet is also suffering in a very similar way. But I can't just do that out of personal goals, because at the same time then we have to expand it to everyone who's part of the rebellion. What about their home planet, their home planet, their home planet? Instead they have to focus on missions that help everything, and eventually that will get to that point, and it's about Ezra understanding that idea, and through his interactions with Saw in this episode he really got the idea of like understanding that it's about the people fundamentally, that you can try all you want to do this crazy damage to the Empire, but when you stop caring about the people, kind of like Saw does, you just become like a terrorist basically, rather than the actual rebellion, which has these specific, rules of engagement, things it will do, things it won't do, and they keep them from stepping over that line that kind of Saw has. That was a nice distinction. Didn't need a two-parter to present that distinction to us, in that I felt that the Geonosis two-parter from the previous season had kind of more or less done that. But I liked seeing Saw again. I hope we see a little bit more of him, but at the same time, I want to see Thrawn properly come into play in this season. He's definitely a character I'm now super interested in after reading that the novel for him. So I want to see what he's really up to now this season and what plans he has. Him, I suppose, Governor Pryce as well. She, I suppose, through the novel as well, becomes a much more interesting character. And then, of course, see really where exactly we're going when it comes to end game of the series. Is just going to be another battle around Lothal to end it, or are we going to go bigger and set up something huge? And of course, where are we going with the Ghost Crew themselves, the characters who are seemingly through canon they kind of have to die in a way, and how do they actually go about resolving that? That's kind of what I'm interested in. I assume Vader will come back into play at some point. What role does he play? And then with Ahsoka, who obviously we roughly know is still out there in some way, somehow. When do they, flick the switch on that? When do they bring that back in? Is that a Rebels thing, or is that just something that they're gonna, at some point in a later stage, come back to the Ahsoka thing, whatever happened there? So that's kind of what I'm, interested in seeing what they do. But yeah, two-parter, but not a lot to say about this one for the most part. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episodes, as well as what I had to say about them. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.